Hey, what is going on, everyone? Hey, so another episode of Arco Answers here. Waiting to see hopefully some questions pop up on the comment bar over to the right. But in the meantime, always, have a few things that kind of want to kick off the conversation. A couple things that have come up throughout the week that I'll be discussing in the absence of any questions that may be coming in live. So real quick, I think I now know the comments you're seeing are actually on the this side of the screen. But a couple things. First thing is be sure to subscribe to this channel. So if you want to receive updates whenever we go live or produce new content, then you'll need to subscribe to the channel, and also there's a little bell notification next to it. If you click the bell notification, that will allow you to see, basically the same thing. It'll notify you whenever we're going live or have uploaded new videos. Another thing, if you are interested in this kind of content, again, whether it's the podcast at govcrepodcast.com, whether it's videos that we produce here to answer questions, or if it's any articles that I've written lately, you can go to there's a link over here that says MailChimp, and you can actually go to that landing page and subscribe to our newsletter. So, and really, I say newsletter. It's a monthly recap of all the new content that has been produced over the previous month. I think with that, I think I'm ready to kind of dive into a couple of topics. Again, hoping to get some live questions here, but otherwise, I do have a few things that I want to discuss that have come up recently. So one thing is I'm working with a client who's looking to, actually a couple clients who's looking to buy a building, and the building has a GSA lease in it, and they're going through the due diligence phase. First time that they've ever purchased a building with a GSA lease in it. And as you might imagine, if you're already familiar with the space, there's a ton of questions that come along with that. I mean, the very first time you receive, a GSA lease, your head probably explodes, especially if it's the full package that has, the 100 plus, pages of agency specific requirements. But in this specific case, the gentleman's lucky buying a building, and it happens to the space has already been built out. Actually, build out was just completed, so don't have to worry about any of those shell related cost drivers. But what does have to be concerned about, and what he does have to be concerned about, and what we did talk about, was that there are still cost drivers that are built in or should be built into the shell rate. And anyone who is acquiring one of these assets absolutely needs to be aware of it. In this case, the agency, the GSA agency, is it's a predominant user of the space in the building. It's a primary tenant. And one of the things that I brought up is how are you did you account for the fact that you're going to have to do cyclical carpeting and paint? And he was like, yeah, of course, common areas, you got to keep them looking nice. I was like, well, hang on, no, it's not that. It's the cyclical paint and carpet that is required by the lease in the actual agency occupied space. And you could kind of hear a pause over the phone where the guy was realizing, no, he hasn't seen that or hasn't heard of that. No one's made him aware of it. So what we end up doing is we end up talking about the particular paragraph that is in section 6 of the lease. And, I don't want to cite the specific clause just because it may be different based on your lease. But, in section 6, there's a clause that speaks to paint and cyclical replacement of paint and carpet. So that on its surface, maybe not such a big deal. Maybe that's something you've considered or factored in already. Just having to refresh space from time to time. But the one thing that you absolutely have to be aware of and have to be cognizant of as you're entering into this is the fact that not only are you the owner responsible for the replacement of the carpet and the paint cyclically, And that, that cyclicality, if that's even a word, sometimes you get to make up new words, I guess. Um, that is stated in the lease. That said, you're also responsible for the movement, the disassembly, the reassembly of any agency furniture, any agency, modular furniture, whatever it is. You are responsible for the disassembly, the movement of it, and the reassembly of it, and it has to be done in accordance with the manufacturer's specifications so that the warranty is maintained. That's how the lease clause reads. Um, if you weren't aware of that before, hopefully now you are. It's in almost every lease. Not going to say that's a blanket statement. Sometimes GSA has made the determination that, hey, look, we're likely not going to use it, which is sometimes the case. The agency doesn't want to go through the hassle in year 5 or year 10 or whatever it happens to be, of having their furniture moved, which means personal property has to be removed from the desk and whatnot, so that the lessor can perform their function. But so it's not always an enforced clause, but it is a cost driver that is embedded in section 6 of the lease. And and if you're not aware of it, then you can't account for it appropriately. So that's really what I'm looking for is I want to get this point across, because the gentleman I was working with had no clue it was in there, had not budgeted for it. He came up with a very unique strategy that he's hoping to work out with the owner, the current owner, in order to basically cover the unpredictability or the future cost exposure there. But yeah, definitely something need to be aware of. So section 6, again, it should be somewhere. I think it's somewhere toward the end of section 6. It has to do with the replacement of carpet and paint. Definitely something you want to look in, whether you currently have a GSA lease tenant in your building, or you're looking to acquire an asset that has a GSA lease tenant. One other thing that kind of came up during this is this asset is located in California, and if you've ever purchased or owned real estate in California, or you live in California, you're very aware that there's an interesting way that California does real estate taxes. And again, I'm not an expert on California real estate taxes. I just know what I've been told, and so if I'm misinterpreting or misstating anything here, I do apologize, for that. But there is some interesting language in the GSA lease that you need to be aware of. Again, if you're looking to purchase an asset that has a GSA lease, especially if they're an anchor tenant or a large proportionate tenant of the asset, you need to be aware of this clause, because I personally had never dug into the California standard lease clause to this level. But yeah, we'll talk about that now. So basically what California does, if you're not already familiar, is, let's say you bought the building in the 80s. So real estate taxes are essentially, frozen, or at least the growth of the real estate taxes are greatly limited. I'm not sure which is actually either the case, but I know that, you do not see regular, massive increases of real estate taxes throughout the life of your ownership of the property in California, from the date the property was purchased to the date you sell. So what's interesting though is the reassessment. It's not a reassessment of value, periodically like it is in every other state. It's actually the property isn't reassessed until the property sells. So when a property sells in California, you can actually see a massive increase in real estate taxes for that asset, depending on when the previous owner bought the building, because that's when essentially the previous valuation was set for that asset, on which the real estate taxes were based. So in this case, the owner, the current owner, has owned the building, I think, for 10, 15 years, thereabouts. and maybe perhaps longer. But the new owner is going in, at least has some cognizance of this. You know, he's done his due diligence, and he knows that the real estate tax bill is going to increase somewhere along the lines of, let's call it $25,000. Pretty substantial given the overall size of the asset to experience a single year increase in real estate taxes of, again, ballpark of $25,000. So my immediate response to that was, yeah, I'll look into it. I know California has a specific real estate clause that no one else has. I'll look into it a little bit more, but generally, real estate taxes are treated as a pass through. There's some caveats to that, but generally it's treated as a pass through. So you probably don't have much to worry about. Well, then I dug into the clause. And I'm actually going to read just because I want to be very clear on this. So in this particular lease, and I think it's probably true of most of the leases, it's the tax adjustment clause. In this case, it's 2.07, but it's the tax adjustment clause, Cal Standard, July 2014. So if you have this clause in your lease and you're looking to purchase a building in California, you're going to want to pay close attention to this. So it's in Section A of this clause, and specifically item 4. And this is where it gets interesting. So it's the definition of the term current year taxes means real estate taxes paid for each tax year following the base year. Now, this is the important caveat. Excluding increases in real estate taxes attributable to any improvement. So if you add on to the building or improve the building in some way, or change in ownership, which occurs basically after the base year. So that was shocking to me. So given how California treats real estate taxes, again, I'm going to read this again and kind of summarize it. 2.07A4. The current year taxes means real estate taxes paid for each tax year following the base year, excluding real estate tax increases based on change in ownership. So I just told you real estate taxes are increased based on changes of ownership. And here the GSA very cleverly, I would say, embeds some language that says, oh, yeah, we'll pay all real estate tax increases, except in the event where the increase occurs due to a change in ownership. So I get it from their perspective. They don't want to give someone, a lease based on the tax base, based on the shell rent they were able to offer, that was provided for in the 70s or 80s, whenever the asset was originally built or purchased or what have you. They're trying to limit their exposure to that massive tax increase if it sells 10, 20 years later. But as a buyer of the asset, you are now exposed to that. So, just however you want to negotiate that into the purchase price, it's interesting. And I guess, I also should pause here to say, I am not a lawyer. I am not a real estate lawyer. I'm just someone who is familiar with the GSA lease. And I came across this lease clause actually yesterday for the first time, specific to California. So what I would say is, definitely, if you are performing due diligence and looking to purchase an asset with a GSA lease in California, you have to run this past your lawyer or have the conversation with GSA to see if you could work out some sort of alternate deal regarding real estate taxes. But this was shocking to me when I read that. So it appears, again, talk to your lawyer, but it appears that you, the buyer, will suffer essentially some very much unintended decreases in cash flow, perhaps that, decreases in NOI that you were basing your assumption on, your assumptions on when you were establishing your purchase price. So between the carpet and paint, again, maybe less important, but also, the fact just how California treats their real estate taxes and this protective language that GSA put in their lease. Please, please, please do your due diligence. Talk to a lawyer, talk to GSA, figure out how this is going to affect you moving forward, because it's very likely your shell rent is not going to be increased. It appears that you're not going to be receiving that lump sum reimbursement for real estate tax increases. So again, talk to your lawyer, talk to GSA, make sure you're covered with regards to the interpretation of this clause. But on the surface, with my lay brain here, it appears that it's going to have pretty substantial impact to the deal you believe you are evaluating. So that's one of the major takeaways here. So the other one is, I really want to touch on something, and I'm getting ready to do, or I've been preparing to do some expert witness work in the upcoming future, and really a lot of the testimony that I'm going to be providing has a lot to do with the changes clause. Now, I can't remember if this is something I've touched on before. I know I've touched on it in my podcast, again, govcrepodcast.com. In a recent conversation I've had with Diana Parks Curran of Curran Legal, who, by the way, is outstanding lawyer in the space. But the changes clause is something that people don't really pay enough respect to, I think, in my opinion. It's frequently used. It's rarely used in an extreme manner. Typically, it's used in a manner that's more you consider within the scope of the lease or what's going on in general. But in this particular clause, and I just want to kind of touch on this. So the occupying, I'm trying to be very delicate here since it is an upcoming testimony that I'm going to be giving, but the occupying agency has basically said, there's been a certain request made for space alterations, and we can't make them per the lease, per the fact that the building is a lead asset. There was a lot of things that had kind of gone into this, but the agency basically threw their hands up in the air and said, no, we can't make any accommodations, we can't make any changes to the space. And then it just, when I first heard what the argument was, I immediately knew, or thought that I knew, that answer was wrong. Of course, I had to dig into the lease, and yeah, in fact, it was wrong, because all the pertinent lease clauses that I had assumed were in there were in fact in there. So, just the one thing to keep in mind is there is this changes clause, and what the changes clause allows the government to do is very much in line with the name. It allows the government to change the contract in any way that it sees fit. Now, you can negotiate what the cost associated with those changes are. That's 100%, how the clause reads, and there's other clauses in there that speak to alterations, but basically the changes clause says the government has essentially a unilateral right to make any changes they desire or need to the lease during the term of the lease, and it's up to ownership to determine the cost of those. And so that was kind of really going to be the crux of my testimony is, the government could have, the government could have elected to implement these alterations, because, if nothing else, there's other supporting lease language in there, but ultimately it comes down to, you have this thing called the changes clause, and the changes clause allows the government to do whatever they want to the asset, to the lease, so long as they properly and appropriately compensate the owner of the building. So another thing to be aware of, if you've never come across it, if GSA is asking you to do something, or some other agency that's using the GSA general clauses, if they're asking you to do something, yeah, there's really not a lot of room to say no. And you can negotiate, you can discuss what the ramifications of it will be, but again, it's in the changes clause. Check it out. General clauses. It's incredibly powerful. I mean, I've seen it, like I said, I've seen it used for very standard reasons, very much so in scope changes to the lease. But also I've been told about examples where it's been used in ways that have kept deals from moving forward, and they've also substantially impacted the asset that was owned by the owner, obviously. So something else to keep in mind. So that's all I got for today. Just wanted to touch on a couple of things that have come up throughout this week, where people have asked me questions regarding certain clauses, or I've had to explain things in greater detail for folks. And yeah, so that pretty much wraps it up. So again, got a couple things over here. So if you are interested in this topic, please subscribe to this channel. Please click that notification bell. Also, you can click on the link that's in the second little post from Arco Answers, and that will take you straight to a landing page where you can sign up for our monthly recap email. And but until then, if you have any questions, feel free to send them my way, and I will answer on the spot. But also, may be able to incorporate them into a future episode, and hopefully help out others out there who are facing similar issues or don't know that they could potentially be facing a similar issue. So with that, thank you very much, and I hope you all have a good day. Take care.